Hey there, Keepers of Chaos and Tier Talk fans, Russ Hamilton. Hey, I wanted to get this video out to you. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. I did a similar video to it a while back, but I'm hoping that this one is going to be even better and even more informative. This is a video about safety, all right? But not the safety you're thinking. We've got two basic kinds of safety in corrections, and the first one is personal safety. And we spend a lot of time and effort and money and training trying to keep ourselves physically safe. And that's as it should be. But there's another kind of safety that we need to, focus on sometimes too and really think it through, because this is the kind of thing that can save your career, because what I'm talking about is professional safety. All right. So I've come up with 5 bullet points that involve professional safety. And these 5 bullet points address the 3 C's. And the 3 C's that I'm going to tell you about are the things that can adversely affect you, all right? And the 3 C's are this: criminal charges, all right, civil liability, and career ending or career damage, right? So if you follow these 5 things throughout your career, the chances are you're going to have a long career, you're not going to end up getting fired, and you're going to be viewed as the professional that you can be. So right off the bat, in these 5, the 5th one is the one that's the most complex and really needs a little extra dose of explanation. But this number 5 is operating in a culture that disregards your oath or your duty. All right. We all stand up there. We all take an oath. We all have duty that's outlined, either in the penal code or some other government code. And that's the law. That's our Bible that we have to live by. But what happens in some of these facilities, and sometimes just in, certain units and stuff, is you can end up with a culture of corruption, and they end up trying to instill codes that are not good for corrections, that are antithetical toward the way that we're supposed to operate. Things like a code of silence, where if somebody tells on someone else for doing something wrong, or hopefully something more than just wrong, but, breaking the law, that individual is ostracized, sometimes even threatened for doing what they did. That is not what law enforcement is about. And let me tell you, I can understand at times where we have administrations that sometimes are so deferential to the inmates that they're not doing the things that they should be doing, like filing charges, holding them accountable, making sure that discipline is instilled. All right. But that doesn't mean that we can take matters into our own hands. That doesn't mean that we can instill a code of silence anywhere. Any person out there who is a correctional officer should be willing to stand up for the actions that they've taken, right? You wouldn't expect the actions that you've taken to be lied about for you by one of your coworkers. You're asking an awful lot of someone to do that, and you shouldn't be. If you're willing to put your life on the line for that individual, why do you think it's okay to ask them to lie for you and put their professional life on the line for you? That's ridiculous. So stop it. You guys that are great leaders and everything else that have sometimes wandered down this path, pull those people back in and say, hey, you know what? What we need to do is we need to instill a culture of responsibility where every man takes responsibility for his own actions. And that's the way it is. Make that your culture, not this other mumbo jumbo that you've got going out there. That's all I've got to say about that for right now. So let's go on to the next one. The next one is failure to maintain personal boundaries with inmates. I mean, this is something that we just run into far too often. Now, fortunately, for the most part, it does tend to be kind of rare, but it still happens several times through your career. You'll see someone get walked off for bringing in dope or cell phones, or for having some kind of sexual relationship with an inmate, right? When you're out there conducting yourself as an officer, there is a boundary beyond which you do not cross with these inmates, and that is anything and everything personal. So if you keep that in your mind when you're talking with these inmates, don't be talking about your personal life, your kids or your wife or the car you drive or any of that stuff. That puts you in a position where you can either be manipulated or taken advantage of. So if you find yourself drifting off in that direction, figure out what it is that you need to fix. Also, if you're seeing someone start to drift there, bring them back under your wing. Make sure that they don't feel that they're being isolated. Because if they're feeling isolated, right, who are they going to identify the most with? Well, it's not going to be with you guys. It's not going to be with their staff, not with their peers. It's going to be with the inmates. So make sure, not just for your own sake, or definitely for your own sake, but for their sake, watch each other's back with regards to that. Don't let those things get out of hand. Correctional officers are some of the most observant people on earth. And when you're observing this stuff happen, whether it's with what you're conducting your business with the inmates or someone else, you can stop it in time and make a difference. All right. Number 3, this is a biggie. And this comes under a couple of different branches, either laziness or trying to cover something up that happened. And that's failure to report a use of force that you've done or a use of force that you've observed. You can't get away from this, people. If you observe force or if you use force, you have to report it in some fashion. Now, the last adult institution, the last adult department that I worked for, everything that happened that was a use of force had to be reported as an incident. And that's the way it should be. You can't just let things slide or just go, man, I really don't feel like filling out the paperwork. It will come back to bite you. And quite likely, because you failed to report it, you're probably going to be terminated. Also, if you've used force, you have to take ownership of that. Make sure that you understand what you need to do in order to document it. And after you while you're documenting it, that you're able to justify it. Put down everything that happened, because that's the only chance that you're going to have to truly memorialize the event under the totality of circumstance that you can remember at that moment in time. Memories fade as you go on. So never fail to document use of force, ever. All right? So, number 2. Now this is, I do not want to sound like some older parent of yours in this, but the use and abuse of drugs or alcohol. All the time out there, we see people trying to deal with the stress of this job through the use or abuse of drugs and alcohol. People, there are other ways to deal with that stress. Let's try a few of them. Let's, be working out, go to church, find a hobby, talk to your friends about problems that you're having, and just try and work through those problems without putting yourself in a position that you end up with a DUI, that you end up poisoning your body, that you end up unable to work, and that you start cutting corners at work because you're on the sauce or drugs or something, where you end up making the kind of mistake that will take you out, that will end your career or damage it to the point that you can never promote. All right? You've got to stay ahead of this stuff. Dealing with emotions and dealing with stress, it can't be done through chemicals. It really can't. All right? So be cognizant of that. And once again, watch out for your fellow officer that thinks that he can deal with it through that, right? Give him a hand up, Maybe he'll accept it, maybe he won't, but you'll have done your part. All right? Last but not least, number 1, failure to know or follow procedures. All right? We deal with procedures all the time. We deal with policies all the time. What just happened this past week that was a huge, huge procedure and policy that was violated in New York, right? It was the suicide of Jeffrey Epstein. And what happened? Well, apparently, if we're listening to the media is saying that these officers just didn't bother to do their rounds. Those rounds are there for a reason. Doing those rounds will protect you even if the inmate commits suicide, right? Knowing these things keeps you professionally safe. Would you feel okay going out there on the tier without knowing what your use of force policy called for? Do you know what your use of force policy calls for? Because if you don't, you shouldn't be out there, right? You should know that forwards and backwards, and anything that happens out there after you use force, you should be able to justify it and know why you were in the right without even having to think about it, right? What about your deadly force policy? You know what comes into play on that? You should know that forward and backwards even more so. Yet we have officers that are ignoring policies, ignoring procedures, and putting themselves at risk. So that's why I chose this one as number one, because it's recent, it's in our heads. We have a glaring example of what happened in New York. Follow your policy and procedure. Know your policy and procedure. Beyond knowing your policy and procedure, know other things. Know your state penal code. Beyond knowing your penal code, know what case law says. How many of you out there have read Tennessee versus Gardner? How many of you out there have read Graham versus Connor? How many of you even know what those cases are about? If you haven't read them, if you haven't been given classes on them, those are things that define the types of force, when and where we can use it, and all sorts of things. And by knowing those case laws, we're able to better apply the force that we use in any given situation, because we know what the law says, we know what precedent says. So anyway, those are just my thoughts. I really wanted to get that out there. Take these 5 things to heart, people. I'm serious. This can save your career. This can do more than save your career. This can save you from going to prison, which is probably what the worst outcome here would be. This could save you from losing a whole lot of money in a civil liability action. So anyway, take it to heart. I'm going to send this off. Anthony's going to post it, and let's discuss it down there, because this is important stuff. Anyway, everyone, stay safe. Stay physically safe. Stay correctionally safe. Stay professionally safe. All right, you guys, take care. Russ Hamilton, signing out.